morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Sir Meerkat, and welcome back to the Moto Meerkat channel. Now, of course, as we all know, Formula 1 is a sport which takes a hell of a lot of money to keep running. The drivers, at least the top ones, get over £40 million a year in wages. The steering wheel alone on the car costs around £50,000, and each team must ship all of that equipment that they take with them all over the world to over 20 different circuits. So those costs really add up. And as there's so much money and so much notoriety to be made in the business of motor racing, especially at the top, it's no surprise that some drivers may attempt to get a bit of a leg up in achieving this goal of reaching the pinnacle of motorsports. Now, according to Wikipedia, I know, the most trustworthy site on the whole of the internet, they've said that a pay driver is officially defined as a driver for a professional racing team who, instead of being paid by the owner of the car, drives for free and brings with them either personal sponsorship or family funding to finance the team's operations. For F1 fans, nowadays, pay drivers seem like a relatively recent introduction into the sport as a whole, as we've seen recently absolute wallies, a load of them somehow being able to rise up the motorsport ladder, seemingly just because of their nicely lined pockets. Take Mahavir Raghunathan as one example, or Alessio Delayed. Oh, actually no, I can't mention that name. Alessio's going to take down my video. I apologise, Alessio. Please leave me alone. But the term has actually been used throughout motorsport's history, with pay drivers being regularly used by teams such as Williams in the 1970s, as the rule on driver changes mid-season was very, very relaxed at that point. This meant that teams would draft in pay driver after pay driver who would only race the car for a small number of rounds, but would give great financial assistance to the team. And this meant that Williams had 10 different drivers in 1975 and 10 different drivers in 1976. That is mad. But also, what I don't like about that is it kind of takes like the aura of being a Formula 1 driver away if so many people are able to achieve it. So I'm kind of glad that the rules are maybe a little less liberal at the moment. But these liberal rules pave the way for some absolute racing gods, such as a man called Riccardo Rosset. Now, I've actually already featured in a video all about Riccardo Rosset on a small channel, not sure if you heard of it, a guy called Josh Rebel. He's pretty small. I like to help spoil the creators, so I'll leave a pop-out banner in the top right corner for you to go and have a watch that video if you like. But be warned, it's mid-quarantine, I look awful. Yeah. But it was made very obvious that these drivers that were being drafted in were not really up to F1 standards. During one TV broadcast, Murray Walker suggested that people were debating whether Riccardo Rosset was F1 quality or not, and co-commentator Martin Brundle replied,
"Well, it's a fairly short debate, Murray."
And honestly, this statement could be applied to a lot more recent examples, such as that last Russian that was in the sport. No, not that Humpty Dumpty. Yes, that Humpty Dumpty. But honestly, I think that the term pay driver should be scrapped altogether, to be honest. It's used far too freely to cover different types of drivers who have acquired the position of power that they're now in from different avenues, and this leads to some serious areas of unfair comparison, in my opinion anyway, and it's kind of being used more of as an insult now towards different drivers than a genuine marker of who's who in the sport. Of course, now F1 is such a worldwide spectacle. Thanks to globalization, technology, social media, all that lot, we've become so much more interconnected. It's given people a lot more avenues to experience more things. But it's also meant that more people are now able to get to Formula 1, so it's kind of impossible to do so now without a huge amount of financial backing. Nowadays, everyone has financial backing, it just depends on where it's coming from. So maybe instead we should be using terms such as privately funded versus publicly funded, like between the team funding it and just their mum funding it. I don't know, just throwing out ideas. So who even counts as a paid driver anymore? Who do we put in that category? Let's have a look at some examples from the 2021 grid. Nikita Mazepin is my first example. Definitely a paid driver. I think we can all agree. He fits the definition perfectly. His dad has privately funded his move up into that Formula 1 seat with Haas through his own company, Ural-Kali, and people don't think that he's really talented enough to be in Formula 1, so perfect fit. Secondly, we've got Lance Stroll, another one that people would often openly agree that he is a paid driver, but in my opinion, he's kind of gone beyond that. Originally, I would say he was a paid driver. He used his dad's cash to get that seat in the Williams, and people didn't really think he was F1 quality. Yeah, I think it was way too early for him. But he's since moved up to Racing Point, which is now obviously turning into Aston Martin, because his dad has bought the team. It's not really paid driver anymore. Paid driver is if you're being privately funded to the team. He's instead just gone around that and just bought the team itself. So I would say that's not really a paid driver. I think we should have a completely new, different phrase for that entirely so that we can differentiate them somehow. But equally, like, it's just a bit of a mad situation to be in, isn't it? Then Sergio Perez, one that's definitely not considered to be a paid driver, but in my opinion, he very much was at some point, or maybe even still is. He brings in a huge amount of Mexican sponsorship with companies such as Claro and Telcel, so although it's not money coming directly from parents, say, like a private fund, it's still money coming from a private source in other companies. And some would argue that he may never have even achieved that leg up into Sauber without the huge backing that he had from these Mexican companies. Then Lewis Hamilton, another example, another person that people would say, well, he's definitely not a paid driver, is he? He's at the top, he's won 7 world championships, he gets 40 however million a year, but he was sponsored by McLaren from a very, very young age. Even his kart had McLaren branding on it, which I've got to say, does look really good. But arguably, would he have ever made it to Formula 1 without that McLaren backing? I mean, his dad certainly wasn't a multi-millionaire, so there wouldn't have been any fund from mum and dad. So Lewis kind of got lucky with that backing, but equally, it was still backing, so is he not a paid driver? Take, for example, a man called Nicky Richardson. I know him relatively well. He's the sort of kart instructor, kart technician for Club 100, and he was on the British karting scene at the same time that Lewis was back in the 90s. And arguably, even according to Lewis, Nicky was a better driver than him. And Nicky definitely had the talent to continue moving up the ranks and make it to possibly Formula 1. Nicky could be the one with 7 world titles, 40 million a year in the bank, but he just wasn't lucky enough to get picked up by a team and moved up through like Lewis was. Just have a listen to this clip of Lewis talking about Nicky and talking about how much he respected him as a driver, even at that young age.
I always remember driving around Ride House. My dad was the only father that would go out on the track, and he would go and stand when I was 8 years old, he would go and stand where the quickest kid was sitting, and at the time was a kid called Nicky Richardson. And as an 8-year-old, I looked up to Nicky. You know, he was so quick, and I was like, I gotta be better than him somehow. And my dad would go and stand where he was braking, and he would move several meters down and say, "This is where you have to brake." No other father was doing that, you know. And so I'd go around and I'd try and brake at that point, and I'd spin off and crash, and eventually I could do it.
So yeah, what I'm trying to drive home with that point is Lewis still would never have made it to where he is today without some sort of backing. So is he not a paid driver as well? Then finally, my final example would be Max Verstappen. Definitely another one, not considered to be a paid driver, but no one really takes into the account the amount that it would help having Jos as a father. Now Jos obviously does have a decent amount of money in the pocket, but I don't think that would have had too much an effect on Max's career. But what I do think would have had an effect is the amount of knowledge and the amount of connections that Jos already had in the motorsport space. And these connections would have given him such a leg up, as the value of connections, relationships that are built between people can often be much more valuable than physical currency alone. And that's why at the moment we're seeing so many famous names, so many famous kids moving up the motorsport ranks. Let's look at Schumacher, look at Alesi, look at Fittipaldi, just to name a few. So although Max undeniably is extremely talented, and I think would have made it to where he is today without any kind of assistance, could we not say that this backing from his father with the connections that he had is making him kind of a paid driver as such? He's got that leg up into the sport, and yeah, it becomes kind of a minefield of who's who, of not really knowing what to call what and So overall, I believe that the phrase is outdated. The use of the term paid driver to define a sportsman in motor racing makes it seem to the viewing public that they have zero skill at all, and that they will just do stupid stuff when they come out on track, and that they don't really deserve their seat at all. Now, someone like Ragunathan fits that mold pretty perfectly. Just look at his perfect line around turn 1 at Monaco in 2019. I can't go over that clip, it's just too good. But someone such as Lance Stroll has certainly proved he has significant pace. Obviously, when he started off in the Williams, maybe he wasn't quite up to speed, but since then, he's really, really improved. And last year, in the Racing Point, he managed to get a pole position. So you really can't take that away from him. Someone that has no talent at all and is just there for money doesn't go out and get a pole position. So I would say that the phrase should either be scrapped or maybe just remolded to fit the new motorsport landscape that we have today, where money talks. No one reaches Formula 1 anymore through talent alone. If you don't have that backing, whether that be from your parents, from private sponsors, or from a junior program, from a big team, they are all simply different sources pumping in money to progress their drivers through the ranks. But enough of me waffling today. What do you guys all think? Do you think that the term should still be used, or should we broaden our horizons of terms used to describe drivers' reasons for making it to where they are today? I'd love to hear all of your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. But if you did enjoy today's video, be sure to drop a like on it down below. I do really appreciate that. And subscribe to the Moto Meerkat channel as well, so you don't miss any of my future motorsport content. Now, if you missed this week's episode of the Chatterbox Podcast, I'd highly recommend that you go and give it a listen. You can click on my YouTube page just down below and you'll find it over there. We're talking to IndyCar driver Charlie Kimball. He was a fantastic chat. So again, I reckon you should go and watch that. But otherwise, thank you all so much for watching today's video, and I will see all of you Meerkats later. Goodbye, guys.